We will get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome, and thanks for being here and being part of the meeting with us here this evening. My name is Vivica Krauser, and I'm the Communication and Education Manager for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks here in Region 2. And I'm gonna go ahead and get us moving along just so that we don't take too much of your evening and give ourselves plenty of time to go through everything and take questions. I know we're gonna have folks join in as we get going, which is just fine. This meeting is being recorded. You can probably see that on your screen, but I just wanted to point that out so everybody was aware. And the big purpose of that is so that this can get posted. It'll probably get posted on our website tomorrow, and it can be a resource for those who weren't able to make it tonight, or if any of you all want to go back and take another look at some of the discussion, it'll be there and available. The other regions have done meetings like this as well, or are doing them. I think it's us and one other region that are kind of wrapping up the meetings tonight. And then all those other meetings are also there available as a resource too, if you're interested. So mostly, again, thank you for being here. And I want to point out right away that if you are used to being in Zoom meetings, which probably many of us are after the last few years, this may look familiar or it may look just a bit different. It's a Zoom webinar. So as a participant in a webinar, you don't have some of the functions that maybe you're typically used to. Your video function isn't there. You can't just unmute yourself, but you can raise your hand, and we want you to raise your hand. So there's a menu bar at the bottom of your screen where you can see the raise hand function. As you have questions throughout the evening, please go ahead and raise your hand. We'll be watching for those raised hands, and we'll be looking for spots where it's easy to pause and let everybody get their questions asked. There's also a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which is really handy. It's a way to, as we're going, we may be in the middle of talking about something, a question comes to mind, go ahead and type it in there. We'll be watching those. We'll be replying to those as much as we can as we go. And as we see some themes pop up in those questions, we'll probably pause and read some of those out loud, some of those Q&As, and some of them are just there for you guys to see as a resource. So make sure you watch for those things. Any questions at all, technical questions, feel free to use the raise hand and the Q&A function for that as well. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. and walk through a couple more things. So as I mentioned a minute ago, tonight is the last night of our season setting meetings statewide. So I think Billings has a meeting going on right now over in Region 5, and we've got this one going. This is the last of 7 meetings that we've had in Region 2 here over the last couple of weeks. So some of you may have been in person to some of the other meetings. This is our only Zoom or online meeting for the season setting process here for Region 2. Otherwise, we've been out and about in some of the communities around the region holding meetings in person. We were in Anaconda last night. We've been in Hamilton, Superior, up the Blackfoot, kind of all over here over the last few weeks. And so this is our last meeting for the region. We're kind of near the end of our public comment period, which I'll go through some of that in a bit more detail. But even though we have about a week left of our comment period, I just want to encourage everybody that the sooner you can submit your comments, the better. It just helps us as we're working furiously to read through all those and try to incorporate them into any adjustments and get those in front of the commission as well. So there's a week left through the 21st, but as we go through tonight and you have comments that you want to get in, just the sooner the better. Even while we're meeting tonight, you can jump on our website and I'll show you how to do that. Tonight's purpose is really an informational meeting, so we're not taking comments as we go. You may submit a comment as we go through the website or something like that, but it's really a lot more effective if you type in your own comment, get it to us that way we don't miss something that's important as part of that. So if I have to remind us of that throughout the night, just know that it's just to keep us on track so that we really focus our discussion as much on questions as possible and as little on comments, and use that function online through email or the comment box to get your comments in. Let's see, a couple other quick logistics. I ran through all the Zoom logistics, so I think we should be covered that way. But any questions, again, if you have any technical issues throughout the night, go ahead and use that Q&A or raise your hand and we'll take care of it that way. You see some faces on the screen, and some of those faces are Fish, Wildlife, and Park staff. We're going to introduce ourselves here in just a minute. There's also some other people that are on the screen with us tonight, and it says CAC after a lot of these folks' names. What that stands for is Citizen Advisory Committee. We have a Citizen Advisory Committee in every FWP region around Montana. And these committees have been in place almost 20 years in some places. And their purpose is we meet quarterly. We have a representation of 19 people that are part of this committee. Everybody has a term. And so we have a lot of coming and going from the CAC, but we have some members that have been around with us for a long time. And we sit and we just talk about a lot of different issues, current happenings. Recently, some of the discussion has been on season setting, as you'd imagine. And so this meeting is jointly hosted by our CAC and our staff here. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that. The members will quickly introduce themselves before we get going. And the CAC, if that's something that you're interested in being a part of, every June we solicit for new members. So watch for that as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here so that we can move to introductions. And I'm gonna start with one of our wildlife biologists, Liz, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Bradley. I'm the Missoula area biologist, and I work the area around the Missoula Valley and west through Superior, St. Regis, Mineral County country.
Thanks, Liz. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Mowry. I'm the wildlife biologist for the Bitterroot area. So pretty much everything from south of Missoula to Lost Trail Pass.
And Randy?
Yeah, thanks, Vivica. I'm Randy Arnold, and I'm the regional supervisor for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in Region 2. And while I've got the microphone for just a second talking about introductions, I wanted to take a moment to recognize somebody who won't be joining us tonight, which is our wildlife manager, Mike Thompson, who retired early last week. I know many of you, in particular the CAC, who I've had a chance to send an email to, were aware that Mike had retired. But just want to acknowledge Mike's many years of service, over 40 years with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and the critical role he played in getting us where we are today here and every season setting cycle. He was really missed through this season setting cycle in particular, the many road trips to all the towns around the region where we held these meetings, and the many years that he provided amazing counsel to me. So really going to be missed. And then the other is our commissioner, Jana Waller. And I visited with Commissioner Waller earlier this week before she left town for a sports show out of state. And she was so disappointed not being able to join us tonight. She knew that she was going to be on the road, and she had high hopes for being able to participate and attend virtually, but had a conflict in her schedule out of state, wasn't going to be able to attend. She very much wanted to let you know that she would follow up after this and review the comments. She's been very active in following the comments to date, and has regularly been contacting me and the biologists for information, following up on things she's been hearing through the season setting process. So she's very engaged to this, very much paying attention, and just wanted me to make sure I extended to you her apologies for not being able to make it.
Thanks, Randy. And now I mentioned we have CAC members. It's not our complete CAC with us tonight, but we have a good representation of folks. And I wanted to see Everett Headley is our chair of our CAC. Everett, would you mind starting with your introduction?
Yeah, my name is Everett. I hail from Stevensville, and I've been on the CAC for a handful of years now. Just excited to hear what people have to say tonight for sure.
Thank you. Ron?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ron Skinner. I live in Corvallis. I have a place down in Sula, and I think I'm the new guy on the CAC committee. So it's going to be interesting.
Thanks, Ron. Pat?
Hello, I'm Pat Sweeney. I live in the 9 Mile, and I was happy to get back to person-to-person meetings with CAC after being Zoom only, but here we are again.
Well, that's a good intro to something I didn't say. I suppose I spoke to the fact that we had some in-person meetings and now this is our virtual one. But what I left out of that is statewide, our approach with the season setting meetings this year was to do just that. It's to offer folks an opportunity to be in person, and some of the smaller communities just kind of lended themselves better to that. And then in most of our headquarter meetings around the state, we have used this format so that folks, for a variety of reasons beyond COVID, but COVID being one of them, it's more convenient for some people to join into meetings this way. So we tried to provide a variety, something that we haven't done before in season setting, but we have used this as a tool more with meetings in the last few years. So thanks for reminding me to say that, Pat. Bill?
My name is Bill Mitchell. Been on the CAC, I think 6 or 7 years. Born and raised in Missoula and currently live in Piltsville.
Thanks, Bill. Kit?
Kit Fisher. I'm born and raised in Missoula. Happy to be here. This is my first year on the CAC.
Thanks, Kit. Mark?
Hey, my name is Mark Cook. I live in Stevensville, and this is my second term on the CAC.
Thanks, Mark. Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan Trin. I'm in Corvallis, and if Ron's the new guy, I'm the new gal. I've been on the CAC since COVID's been around, so fairly new.
Thanks, Susan. Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Price. I live in Missoula, and I've been on the CAC for I think 9 years now. This is the 9th year. Yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Greg. And Josh?
Yeah, I'm Josh Elliott. I'm not actually on the CAC, but I'm an interested citizen, and my sister is on the CAC up in Region 1.
You got promoted to panelist, and I just read along here. So sorry, Josh, to put you on the spot here. And I hope we didn't miss anybody that didn't get put on the panelist list that is a CAC member, but thank you. Ron Howell, you are on here with us, and we haven't given you a chance to introduce yourself if you wanted to do that.
Thanks, Vivica. My name's Ron Howell. I was born and raised in Missoula. I've worked for the department for about 15 years. All of that time spent in enforcement, most recently serving as the Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks here in Helena. And now recently I've accepted the job as the legislative liaison. So trying to make as many of these meetings as I can. Looking forward to hearing from the public and comments that come in here tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Ron. I think we got everybody there. Hopefully we didn't miss any of our CAC members. Thanks for being with us tonight, and thanks for serving on the CAC. Before we start to dive into some of our proposals and going through those and letting Liz and Rebecca lead us through that, I just want to spend just another minute talking about where we're at in the season setting process, just to make sure there's no questions there. So if you've been tracking along with us since late summer, early fall, you'll remember that this year with season setting looked a bit different than past season setting processes, where this was kind of our first time to be out and really talking about proposals. This year, there was an emphasis early on at taking a hard look at what can we do to simplify regulations? Are there things we can do by combining hunting districts, by paring down some license and permit types, really taking a hard look at what is biologically supported that way that might turn into regulations that are a lot simpler, shorter. Are there things we can do there? And this was our first time really taking a holistic look at, can we simplify our regulations? So that meant that back in late September, early October, we came out with a first draft of some regulations. We had a meeting like this. First week of October, we got a ton of feedback from not just those meetings, but also through everybody who was reviewing those first drafts and commenting online. Our biologists around the state then took that feedback, worked with our director's office and other staff, and modified those drafts, brought them back to the Fish and Wildlife Commission at the December 14th meeting. That was where the proposals that we now have that are all online that we'll go through tonight became tentatives. And so now we're at the point of our season setting process here for about another week, where there's about 5 weeks of opportunity to take a look at what the commission approved as tentatives back on December 14th, review those, ask questions, which again is what tonight is all about, is learning more about those and asking any questions to help inform any comments that you might want to make here in the next few days. Again, we have another week of the comment period, but I'm really trying to encourage folks, the sooner the better. It just helps us get our heads around all the comments that are out there and try to use them as best we can as we look at making changes and getting all that information in front of the commission. And then here in about 3 weeks, February 4th, the commission will consider all the tentatives again, along with all the public comment, and make final decisions on the hunting regulations that will then be put in place for this year and next year. And then we'll start all over again. So that's where we're at in the process. And I want to also take just a second here and share my screen one more time to just give you a look. Just a second here. But maybe. All right. So I just wanted to give you a quick look, if you haven't already been to our website to look through all these materials, which I'm sure many of you have. If you are on the homepage, so when you go to the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks homepage, you'll come to this screen. And because this is such a big topic right now, right there, front and center, is a link in this box here to our regulation proposals. And if you click on there, you will see all the information on how to comment by email. You would have seen the list of season setting meetings like this one. And then down below, there's a bunch of boxes kind of organized either by statewide proposals, by species, by region. So however it's easiest for you to best navigate to the topic that you're after or the location you're after, this is a great spot to go in, find all that information. And then you can see under each one of these boxes, such as deer and elk, comment online, click there, and then there's even maps on here that help you kind of navigate to the information that you're looking for. So if you haven't already used this, or if you're going to use it again after tonight's meeting, that's where you go to find it. And with that, I'm going to pause, just make sure we don't have any questions before we get rolling through some of the specifics of our proposals for the region. Again, you can use the raise hand function. You can use the Q&A box. It looks like we have one person on the phone. If you are a phone caller and you want to raise your hand to ask a question, *9 on your phone will show me that your hand is raised. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Rebecca.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Maybe. Are you all seeing my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So, so I'm going to cover the Bitterroot and the Upper Clark Fork proposals. And hopefully, you know, nothing should be super surprising. But yeah, there's a lot to cover, particularly here at the beginning. So Vivica already went over this. You know, how we got here. We did an early scoping period, had some pretty big changes that we proposed for Region 2 involving a lot of hunting district boundary changes and eliminating a lot of license permit types. But we got a lot of public comment. In fact, I think more comments for Region 2 than any other region. And so that did result in us pulling back from most of those initial proposals that we presented to you in that first meeting that we had. And then December 14th was the commission meeting to endorse the tentatives and open up this public comment period that's open right now. So in Region 2, as I said, we pulled back on a lot of our initial proposals, but we did keep some. So I'll talk about some of these in more detail, and you'll see these pop up for specific watersheds and hunting districts as we get to them. One big thing was eliminating antlerless permits, and that was a statewide direction because of just this, you know, idea that permits should be for antlered animals and B licenses should be for antlerless animals, and that's the direction that the department is going toward. So that is applying to us. And we had a lot of antlerless permits in Region 2. Most of them are going to be replaced with B licenses, not all of them, and we'll talk about those as we go. Another thing that we proposed early on for many hunting districts was to eliminate the unlimited mule deer permits that we've had in several areas, including in the Bitterroot, and replace those with a general season, which would only be 3 weeks long. So it would exclude the last 2 weeks of rifle season, which then also excludes them from the muzzleloader season. So that is something that we are retaining. That's a proposal we're retaining for several hunting districts. There was another statewide direction to add back a late antlerless season to over objective hunting districts. You know, you'll remember a lot of the shoulder season discussions in the past had us going to either a January 15th or a February 15th date. And so a lot of those are being moved back to January 8th for a lot of hunting districts, and we'll get to those too. There are some boundary changes to talk about and hunting district consolidations in the Blackfoot and the Lower Clark Fork. And there's a few other statewide proposals that would impact us that I haven't gotten into yet, but I will. So here's a map. You know, you probably are all familiar with this. These are the current district boundaries that we have for Region 2. And so I think how we're going to do this tonight is we're going to go over a couple of statewide proposals. I guess really just one or two that have to do with elk, first of all. Then we're going to move to the Bitterroot, cover those. Upper Clark Fork, cover those. And then Liz will take over and do the Lower Clark Fork and the Blackfoot. So that's the plan. And we will pause. There's a couple points in here that we'll take a pause, particularly for questions. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is elk. And a lot of you in the Bitterroot probably know about this statewide elk permit proposal that would apply to one of our, two permits in the Bitterroot. So We heard some talk about this during scoping. It wasn't presented as an actual proposal to apply to any hunting district. It was a question posed to commenters. As such, I've got it quoted here. Basically, if you draw a limited bull elk permit, should you be restricted to only hunting that district for that the season or the sex? So that was asked, and there actually was a lot of comment in support of that. But because this, that was a scoping question and it was phrased like that, we didn't explicitly ask for how that would apply to our districts in Region 2. We didn't explicitly ask for comment on that. But on December 14th, then at the commission meeting, they did adopt some new proposals. Particularly, I believe the one in question that ends up affecting us was unbundling the 900 archery permits over in, I think, regions 4, 5, and 7. And then some of those would become unlimited permits, and I think some would become limited permits. And I might be wrong on that, but it should all be there in the master list. But along with that came a proposal to restrict holders of permits to those hunting districts for which they have a permit. And then, of course, once that came about, that would apply to us. We have 4 permit areas in Region 2. The one that's kind of come up as being a hot topic with a lot of folks is 270, the 270-45, which is an unlimited brow tine bull permit. So the actual proposal is if you draw a permit, any elk permit, you would be limited to hunting that hunting district for brow tine bull elk. So for example, in hunting district 270, if you get a 270-45, you could only hunt brow tine bulls in 270 for both archery and general. It doesn't stop you. It would not stop you from hunting antlerless elk on your general anywhere you were allowed to do that. So you could still, archery hunt antlerless elk in 261 or any other areas in the state where you could do that. But for brow tine bulls, it would restrict you to that. So, this is the question that we've posed, and I wanted to add, and I think Randy, I don't know if you wanted to add something to this as well. We have gotten a lot of comments on this so far, in particular regarding the 270-45, and so we're going to be taking a hard look at that. So, I guess I should keep on the screen share, but Randy, did you want to add anything?
Not particularly, Rebecca. I think that's a good way to describe it. We're very much hearing our public's concern for how that might be applied to that unlimited permit. Just looking for what options might be. And before the commission meeting, we'll have a proposal that'll go out to the public that they'll be able to see before the commission meeting on where we landed there.
So thanks, Randy. Are there any questions about that at this point? And I can't see hands raised or anything. So Vivica, you might have to help me. Oh, Alan.
Alan, you should be able to talk. You do have to use the unmute. Yep. Okay. Looks like we're good.
What's the biological reasoning behind locking us out of hunting in other parts of the state if we get the 270 unlimited permit?
So I want to stress that this,
or is that just a enforcement issue?
I don't think it's either, I don't think it's an enforcement issue. And I want to make sure that I stress that this was a statewide thing. We didn't come up with this for Region 2, so I have no biological reason for this in 270. I believe that the purpose of this, where it was being proposed for regions 4, 5, and 7 was I believe it was a hunter crowding issue, and reducing hunter crowding by making people who got a permit stick to their hunting districts and not flood adjacent general license areas. I think that's what it was. If Liz or Vivica or Randy want to correct me on that, I'd be happy to defer to them. But yeah, you're correct. It was not something I proposed for 270. It was just an effect of that statewide proposal.
So much of the advantage to elk hunting in 270 is weather driven, and if the weather's not right, as it wasn't last year, we're locked from hunting anywhere else in the state. That's just silly.
So I hear you, and I hope that you will comment your thoughts on that on our online.
They are, yes, thank you.
Anything else about this particular proposal?
I'm not seeing anything else, Rebecca, popping up at this point. We can always come back if needed, but I think we're
Okay.
good for now.
Thanks. And I am seeing, I get a little, there's something that pops up that says when someone raises a hand. So I did see that.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll move on then to the Bitterroot specific proposals. And again, there are some other ones embedded in here that I'll touch on that would apply to other parts of Region 2 as well. So just a really quick overview of where we're at with our spring survey numbers in relation to the population objectives. And so this, I think I presented this at the earlier meeting, and it's still the same because I count my elk in the spring, so we haven't done that yet. So I'll start with the North Sapphires. So you can see here, we're still over objective. It's kind of the hunting district where we've been over objective for a while. And we've had some struggles with a lot of elk on private land and difficulty accessing those elk. So the proposals are one, to eliminate the antlerless permit that we had there, which again, that's kind of applying to all of our antlerless permits in the state. In this case, we're not proposing to replace it with a B license, but instead we're proposing to add general license harvest for cow elk during rifle season. And I am kind of uneasy about this one. This might be one we pull back from just because I don't want to be mining elk off of public land. And I think that that's a risk that a lot of people have been raising. So certainly one we're going to discuss more, and I'm going to, have my eyes open for public comment. Another thing that we would do here, we've had this over-the-counter private land B license. It's the 262-01. It's valid in several places in the Bitterroot. And we had a late season in 204 for a couple of years on that license, or it used to be the 002 region-wide license. And then we kind of had to pull back from all the late seasons for a couple of years. And so we're just proposing to put that back in 204. Used to have it there to February 15th, but we're only going to extend it to January 8th. So, and again, that's a private land only tag. It is over the counter, but private land, and you have to purchase it before the start of general season. So, the rationale for this, of course, 204 continues to be over objective. And I have paid a lot of attention to the harvest data, and we've had some general license opportunities for public land elk in 204. For youth and permit to hunt from a vehicle. And then we also had, the antlerless permit there. And with those opportunities, our antlerless elk harvest has been very low. So those 23 elk that I mentioned there last year, those were just on the general license and the antlerless elk permit. So that doesn't include harvest on the 262-01, which typically is higher than both of these other sources. And I know that, a lot of these elk are on some big ranches up in 204, but those ranches are achieving the majority of the antlerless harvest right now with those opportunities on private land. And so the thought with this proposal is we would enable two antlerless elk to be harvested, per person with these tools. They could use their general elk tag and the over-the-counter B tag. So again, it's something that I'm not super confident in, and I'm going to be taking a hard look at it, and I wouldn't be surprised. You guys shouldn't be surprised if we do make some adjustments on this. But yeah, definitely interested in your comments, especially if you hunt this district. And, we take suggestions too. It's been a tricky place to try to manage elk. So, and I will pause at the end of the elk presentation here if anyone has specific questions about these elk proposals. So the next one I'll talk about is Hunting District 240, which is the west side, the Bitterroot Range. We're within objective there. We've been comfortably within objective for a while. And the only proposal we have there is to adjust the boundary. So the low drainage has kind of been, it sort of functions differently than the rest of the Bitterroot drainage. And so Liz and I had talked about this and thought that it made more sense to exclude it from 240 and add it in with the northern district. And Liz will talk about her changes that she's proposing for the lower Clark Fork. So the new boundary would become the ridgeline between the South Fork of Lolo and the western Bitterroot ranges. guess, western and eastern Bitterroot tributaries. And here's a map of what that would look like. So it's not super to scale. They're kind of different scales here, but you can see that we would be moving the boundary south from Highway 12 to that ridge and Carlton Creek. So, you know, Liz and I, we always fly Lolo Creek simultaneously in two planes. We're each in a different plane counting the elk. And then when we get home, we have to sort of talk and be like, well, what about this herd? Is that your herd or is that my herd or your elk? Which objective do those go to? You know, whose elk are those? And it's always been kind of tricky. So this would better capture specific elk herds and enable us to, you know, design our objectives to be a little bit more precise. And I just said all of that, so I won't make you read this. So 250, the West Fork, the only proposal is the one I already mentioned, the statewide proposal that requires holders of limited elk permits to be restricted to that district. So 250 has a limited elk permit, and so that would apply there as well. 260, Liz is going to touch on this as well, as this applies to the Missoula portion of 260. 260 has been kind of confusing for a while for a lot of folks. We had different portions for River Valley and Missoula County, and so we're proposing to remove those. Remove that over-the-counter Bitterroot B license that I talked about before that was valid there for archery, and add the one that Liz was hoping to add to the Missoula portion. It's the 201-01, and she'll talk more in detail about that when we get there. But it's a different over-the-counter B license. And it would be valid then in the entire hunting district for special weapons. And that's for an early season, rifle season, and the late season. So archery season would still be archery only. And I, you know, the Bitterroot has always been pretty contentious with bow hunters. You know, they're very concerned about putting guns in the Bitterroot portion of 260. And so this option, having a different B license than the one that's valid for the rest of the Bitterroot, would hopefully it would really cut down on the number of people who would be interested in that tag, and it would help hone it to people who really need it, landowners that really are having issues with elk and they just can't get them with archery. You just cannot move those elk with a bow and arrow. So oh, and then another statewide proposal, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a slide or two. It adds an additional over-the-counter B license, which again, I'll talk about that in a second. So don't get too hung up on that right now, because I will address it. So the purposes for this one, just simplify hunting regulations. Land, you know, 260 is pretty much all private land, and these tags that we're talking about are all private land only tags, B licenses. And so landowners will still be able to, you know, pick and choose what weapons they want people to use on their lands. If they want them to be archery only, it's archery only. And then in the Missoula portion, it would allow that 201-01 would be valid in the neighboring district. And so there's a lot of issues with elk that are going across boundaries. And so that would address the issues there. And again, Liz will talk about that. So as I said, should limit demand in the Bitterroot, because people will have to choose which over-the-counter tag they want. So that statewide proposal I mentioned, it's confusing and maybe something y'all haven't heard yet. It was another thing that came out on the December 14th commission meeting, where they said any hunting district that is 200% or more over the objective would get this additional statewide over-the-counter B tag. And they're calling that, I believe, the 900 dash something B license. And so, again, this was a proposal that wasn't directed at us. It wasn't directed at 260, but in the, you know, doing the paperwork afterwards, they found, oh, well, you know, we do have an objective of 50 in 260, and we're 316% over that. And so that automatically puts us within that proposal. So, you know, it probably wouldn't impact us hugely, other than adding a line in the regs and maybe be a little more confusing. There was some vagueness about the weapons. Some people brought this up at Hamilton too, that as written in the mock regulations that are available online, it doesn't actually say that that's limited to archery only, but that was our understanding, is that it would still be archery only for this statewide license in 260. But this is another one that, you know, we've been talking with the director's office and with Helena's staff, and you know, something that was supposed to be put in 260. It wasn't intended for 260. We already have options there. We already have over-the-counter licenses. And so I think we're really hopeful that we won't have to keep that. That's something we can exempt. So Just a couple more. I'm almost done with elk. So the East Bitterroot Hunting District 261, we're finally within objective. Yay, we're barely within objective there. And the only proposal there is to replace the Antlerless permit with a B license. The quota would go up a little bit. Our current quota, I believe, is 35 on that Antlerless permit, and we would raise it to 50. And then for 270, we've been within objective there for a while, really high elk population. The proposal, besides the statewide permit thing that we already talked about, would be making the over-the-counter B tag, which, excuse me, I've talked about already, valid for the whole district. Currently, we have that B license valid for private land only north of Rye Creek, so it excludes French Basin. And the proposal is to add that into the south part of 270. And the reasoning for that was just because we have one block management area there that's been kind of the reason we have to really be careful about our B license opportunities. It's got really good access, and it's where we have had some shootouts in the past. And so they recently changed their access requirements. You can only park in certain areas. I believe there's only 3 parking spots and 2 parking areas, 3 parking spots per parking area, and there's 2 parking areas, and you cannot hunt that BMA unless you're parked in one of those spots. So that really cuts down on the number of people who can just flood into that BMA and harvest elk. So that was the reasoning behind that one. So I'll pause here. That's all the Bitterroot elk proposals I have, and then just a few more for deer, and then we'll move on to Upper Clark Fork. So I think I did see that there was a comment in the Q&A, which I can't, I guess I can see. Oh, and somebody. Okay,
I responded to that one, Rebecca.
Thanks, Randy.
We do have another question here from Will.
So I have a question. I just seen something about this 201 tag for 260. Are you seriously actually proposing early rifle season in the river bottom? When we did away with the muzzleloader shotgun tags in 260, but now we're proposing an early rifle season in the river bottom. This just doesn't even make sense. I don't know where it's coming from.
We're not proposing that. So that I think is
slide.
Sorry?
It's in the slide. It says early rifle season under that 201 tag.
It should say special weapons.
It does. If you keep going back, because when you were talking about Missoula's district for 260, and then coming south into the Bitterroot, it said the Bitterroot was advising against it, special weapons, but it says early rifle season on 201.
Are you saying that you see that in my slides? You saw that in one of my slides?
Early rifle season. Add over-the-counter 2001 over-the-counter private land license. Early rifle season.
So yeah, so I'm sorry, that's confusing the way I have that worded. So no, it would be valid for special weapons only during an early season, during rifle season, and in a late season. So it would not allow rifle. We're just saying that the special weapons would be valid in rifle season. Does that make sense?
So I'm trying to make sense of this because I hunt primarily. I do a lot of hunting in 260, and when this went to private tag only, you can't get any access anywhere. Nobody in the Bitterroot side, which is one reason why 260 should be split to Missoula. They should have a 260 north and a 260 south. So we exclude little LA from what we're doing in the Bitterroot because it's entirely different up there with the amount of people. And the 260, with the influx of people we've had in the Bitterroot, you can't get access on the private land. And these private land tags, I understand the state uses that for deprivation and everything else to say, oh, well, we're not going to give you any money for your hay because you don't let anybody hunt. They don't care. The people that are buying that property in 260 in the Bitterroot are the reason why we have $300 a ton hay right now. They don't care. We can't get any access on private land. So that whole tag does nothing unless this goes back to public land. You know, there were times this year floating the river duck hunting. We stopped counting deer behind the double fork when we got to 120 as they were coming out of the tree line. It's insane, the deer population there. The elk population is insane because they get zero pressure. and what little bit of ground you can actually get on the river, which you have to float down to in a raft or in a drift boat to be able to hunt this little Forest Service property that's landlocked by private property. You can get to them there, but you can't touch them because, well, the tag's only good for private land. They're protected. They're not going to leave. That herd keeps growing and growing and growing. And then I understand what you said now. You cleared that up, but it was thinking like, wait a minute. We did away with the muzzleloader tag on public property, and now we're going to let in an early rifle season. There's parts of 260 where you can get into on private ground, and they will not let you use archery because they run cows on the property, and they don't want missed arrows that have blown through a deer. They don't want them laying in their haystack because when they go to hay, and I do it, property that I lease, that I run cows on, no, I don't want anybody archery hunting in there because if I pick that up with a baler and a cow eats it, I just lost a cow. There's no leeway for us in 260 unless you can get access to private property, and nobody wants you there. The private land tag needs to go away and just open it up.
But just a reminder that if you haven't submitted those comments online, be sure to do so. We just don't want to miss that.
Yeah, we keep submitting it since the muzzleloader tag went away, but it just keeps falling on deaf ears because it seems like the state's pandering to the big money people that are buying the property up in 260. And then it seems like we have to follow Missoula's rules. Well, Missoula's doing this in 260, so we're going to do that in the Bitterroot too. Well, you go all the way down to the south border of that Darby, there's a big difference between Missoula and Darby. We don't have the same thing going on here. They have more of the population, more of the people, fine. Split the district. Let Missoula do whatever Missoula's going to do, and let the Bitterroot put in their own rules. It's very simple. You know, that section of property I was talking about that you have to float down to towards Stevensville, which is Forest Service property. There is nothing around. Nobody can hike in there to walk their dog, and we can't shoot a muzzleloader there. But Mildenberger's can open his property up right here off Sleeping Child and Scalcahoe Road, and they can shoot rifles at elk with a backdrop as a trailer park. It doesn't make any sense the way these regulations are going. And it's really kind of getting irritating. It's like we're losing hunting ground. We're losing privilege with these restricted tags. That I understand the fact that the state needs something to use against landowners for deprivation. But when you put private property on the tag, private land only, all you're doing is curtailing the hunters. And the deer populations and the elk populations are continuing to grow. They're continuing to get out of control until chronic wasting and other diseases have gone rampant. And everybody sits back and goes, I wonder why that happened. Well, it's because nobody can control the damn population. Something needs to be done about it. And it just feels like nobody is listening to us, or nobody wants to listen to us.
Thank you. Any other questions about Bitterroot elk? Okay, so I'll move on to deer then. So first I'll talk about whitetail deer. There's a couple of proposals that have to do with whitetail deer in the Bitterroot. So one of them is adding general license, either sex opportunity on private land for all of the Bitterroot hunting districts except 250. So currently we have a first week opportunity in 204, 261, and 270 to harvest either sex whitetail deer. And we already have it for the whole season in 240. And so this would just be, mimicking the 240 system for those other hunting districts. So it would allow hunters to take does instead of bucks on the general license on private land, which a lot of people have said could actually improve some buck survival and reduce problematic deer densities. And then we also, in conjunction with this, we're going to remove that 299-00B license, which is an over-the-counter 1 per hunter doe tag for the Bitterroot. And just based on what I'm hearing from people, we may pull back on that one. So we may keep the 299-00 and not remove it, just based on the public comment, and because we have a lot of whitetail deer. I think they can take that additional pressure. So let's see. Oh yeah, so here's a breakdown of the harvest in 2020, just last year, based on these 2 opportunities in the 4 hunting districts that we're talking about. So you can see there in 240, there's a big general license harvest on whitetail does. And of course, that's where we have that season-long opportunity for folks to take either sex. The 299 tag is getting a lot of harvest some places, not a lot of harvest other places. But we're hoping that this would increase the ability to take some does on your general tag. Another proposal relates to both species, and it should be a simple one. It's just standardizing season dates in 260 and 262. So we have several tags and general license opportunities that end on January 1st and others that end on January 15th. And it's just been confusing for a lot of people for a long time. And so we're just proposing to standardize all of those to January 15th. And just a couple more, moving on to just mule deer now. So the first one is one that I talked about, or I alluded to early on in the presentation. We're proposing to get rid of the unlimited buck permits that we've had in 240 and 204 and move those to a general license harvest. And so those 2 opportunities, they've been on a 3-week season for a while. We have not had a 5-week season there for many years, at least since I've been here. And so that wouldn't change. We would just be getting rid of the unlimited permit. And this might sound a little counterintuitive. We have seen some declining trends in harvest in these 2 districts. And so, why would we open those up to general license hunting? And the reasoning is that, the data and the harvest is showing that the unlimited buck permits may not actually be doing anything to decrease pressure and may increase pressure. Because they do have that restriction on them where if you draw a permit, you can only hunt that district. And so the other little aspect of this is that these 2 districts, I believe, actually, I think all of the unlimited districts, they're not first choice only. So most people will put in for 270 or 261 as their first choice, and then one of these as a backup. And so then they get that permit, and then suddenly that's the only place that they can hunt mule deer. They can't go out to central and eastern Montana where there might be, booming mule deer populations. They're restricted to just those districts. And so our thinking here is that we may actually be increasing pressure in those units where we really don't want to. So we just want to let hunters go where the deer are. That's the thinking behind this proposal. And here's a trend map that I believe was in one of our quarterlies that Mike Thompson produced that shows the harvest trend. So don't get super fixated on the colors. The colors are just the regulation type that we have. So red are limited permit areas. Green are general license mule deer hunting areas, and yellow are these unlimited permit areas. And so you can see that in most of them, or I guess in all of them, we have either stable or declining harvest trends. So the unlimited permit is, it may not be doing much to limit harvest. And so that's what we're concerned about. And this is, of course, something we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. We're trying to add in some surveys, some aerial surveys to some of these districts that we haven't surveyed in a while. And then, of course, we'll pay careful attention to harvest. And then the last proposal, I believe this is the last proposal, is to eliminate the 240-50 wilderness mule deer permit just because it has very, very little harvest. And so this was an LPT that kind of came out as being one we could remove just to clean up the regs a little bit, just because it doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. So I'll pause there. That's all I had for Bitterroot Deer. And I saw a Q&A, but it looks like somebody else answered it. So any questions about that? Seeing none, can we move on to Upper Clark Fork, I guess? All right, so this should go pretty fast, hopefully. This is just a map to give you an overview of the Upper Clark Fork if you're not super familiar with it. And here's the aerial census data. These are winter surveys that are conducted in the Upper Clark Fork. Not all of them were flown last year, but I presented the most recent counts that we had. And so you can see we're over objective in a few areas, below objective in others and within in 217. And I want to just draw your attention really quick to 216 here. There's a star there because at the last count we were over objective, and in the current count we're below objective, and that's looking at the data that Julie Galla collected and her thinking on it was just that those elk move. So, you know, if they're not in 216 at the time of the survey, it can really affect the numbers. They just hop over. I think she said into 210 is where those elk usually end up. So they technically below objective, but not, you know, probably not realistically below objective. So the first proposal is the one we've already mentioned several times now, removing antlerless elk permits and replacing with B licenses. And the current proposal is to retain existing quotas, but we have more time to adjust those if we need to based on count data. So the one that's on here that we would not replace with a B license would be 214. That would just be removed. We would no longer have a you know, antlerless tag in there. The rationale behind this, of course, the statewide directive, permits should be for antlered animals, B licenses for antlerless. And all of those hunting districts with B licenses are over objective except 214 and 216. And then of course, 214 has been below objective for a few years now. And so we're just proposing to get rid of that opportunity. 217, just pretty simple. We have an antlered elk, or I'm sorry, so 217 is another district where we have an elk permit, a brow-tine bull elk permit. And so again, going back to that statewide proposal would restrict hunting to that district only if you got that permit. And then this was the relatively simple one, 213 and 215, just again, adding back that shorter antlerless late season these are limited B licenses for 213 and 215. And I don't have much for deer, so I'll just move into those and then take questions. So again, going back to that unlimited buck permit proposal that applies to these 5 hunting districts in the Upper Clark Fork, moving those to the 3-week general season with no muzzleloader season. And then 217, we have a B license there that we would make valid on private land only. So those are all I have for deer and elk in the Upper Clark Fork. There's a few other species proposals I just want to hit on real quick, nothing too complicated. And this goes back to the Bitterroot as well. Adjusting the boundary of moose for 240 just to mirror the changes that we're making to the deer and elk boundary. And then a few losing some opportunities for sheep just because we've had some die-offs and we've had some low populations. So removing all the opportunity for 212 and 216 in the Upper Clark Fork, and then reducing the opportunity from 3 to 1 in 250, which is the Painted Rocks sheep herd in the Bitterroot. There's also a boundary change we're doing down there, again, just to mirror the deer and elk boundary. So that's all I have. And I see Everett has his hand raised.
Yeah, Rebecca, I was just going to ask, the muzzleloader season being statutorily required now, does that present a challenge when you're doing these special 3-week seasons for mule deer? Is there not a requirement then that it be open?
So the way I understand it, no, it's not a requirement. The way I understand it was the commission direction was any license or opportunity that is valid on the last day of rifle season would then extend into the muzzleloader season. So that automatically eliminates all of the 3-week mule deer seasons because those aren't valid on the last day of rifle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you just need to be careful when you set that actual 3-week season so that it's earlier, not later. Is that it?
Yeah, all of these would be early 3-week seasons. They would not, none of these would be valid for the final 2 weeks of rifle season. So yeah, but we would need to make sure that we catch that they don't, there's no accidental muzzleloader season that's in the regs for those.
Great, thanks.
Anything else about the Bitterroot or the Upper Clark Fork? Okay. I'll stop sharing and, oh, hold on. Someone else has a hand raised. Everett's hand is still raised. Do you have another question? Okay.
But I do see a couple other folks here. Casey?
Hey, Rebecca, do you know when the last time 210 was flown? Or what those population objectives or not the objectives, but the estimates are based on?
Let's see. For elk?
Yes.
I will look that up for you right now. Just give me a minute. I'm checking our survey and inventory database. Okay, 210 is in the, what EMU is that in? So that's in
John
the
Long.
EMU. So it looks like 210 was last flown in March 17th of last year. So it was flown last winter.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
And looks like Will, you have your hand up. You should be able to unmute yourself. Will, do you have your hand up?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Rebecca, when you're doing your aerial surveys for deer with the helicopter, just kind of a off the ball question, the survey area, say if you were in 270, how big of an area, how many hours are you guys in the air for that?
There's two surveys that we do for 270. We do a post-season survey that is intended to get buck to doe ratios before their antlers drop. So that is a trend. We do not fly we don't need to fly the entire area. So we normally will fly one flight, which is about 3.5 hours to get those trend data. We then also do a spring count in early green up to get a total count, to try to get an actual total count of the deer for the long-term trend. And that is typically an all-day flight. It's two separate flights with fueling up in between. So it usually ends up being between 7 and 8 hours. And so we don't cover the whole district. We go from Sula to Skalkaho and just cover the winter range that's greening up, where most of the deer should be in that area. And we do, the whole point is we try to do that same area year after year so that we can get a trend. So it's not the total population, but we do try to count every deer in that area, in that trend area.
And those are mostly in the spring?
That survey is done in the spring. Yeah, we do it during early green up when those deer are sucked right down onto that fresh green grass.
Okay. Are there any surveys that are being done between, say, June through August aerial wise?
No, I don't think many people, I think there's some elk surveys that are done after the calves are born to try to get productivity surveys. We don't do any of those in Region 2. The main reasoning is it's harder to find the elk. They're not bunched up in big groups. One of the reasons we do winter and spring surveys is because that's when the elk are most visible. It's when they're out in the open because they're feeding, or they're pushed down into a smaller area because of snow. So it's just, we could do late survey, summer and fall surveys. It would just take a lot longer and we wouldn't find near the number of elk.
Okay. No, I'm bringing that up because I understand a lot about how the aerial surveys work. I've done a lot of them. I happen to be owner of Bird Dog Aviation, but I've never done anything in Montana. A lot of the surveys I do is down in Texas. I go down there to work and then spray corn going up through that area. That's where I run my business out of, but I live up here. I have the ability to bring cheaper aircraft up here if the state was willing to do more aerial surveys. I have aircraft we use for spraying that I can run for half the cost that your typical Bell 206s are running for. I just can't ever find this data when it goes out for bid. I have looked numerous times.
So Will, we do have, we have contracts set up for FWP to use private aircraft. I believe there is a 7-year cycle. So every 7 years, those contracts are open for bid. You'd have to contact our chief pilot to learn more about that. His name is Joe Rahn, R-A-H-N. And if you're interested in trying to become a contractor, he can give you more information on how to do that.
I know Joe. Okay. All right. A little off topic, but yeah.
That's okay.
Thanks.
And I'm not seeing any other raised hands. Oh, wait. Yes, I am. Let me get back to my list here. Michael. Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great, great. I just wanted to check you are going to cover black bear later.
Yes, we, Liz is talking about some of the other statewide proposals, which includes black bear, and game bird.
Great.
Yeah, she'll be talking about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're good for now.
Okay, we're going to move on, and I'm going to talk about the Lower Clark Fork next. And these are the hunting districts kind of immediately kind of around northwest side of Missoula and west out to Lookout Pass. And so back in the early fall, as you kind of heard about, we did a little different season setting process this year, and we were asked to take a hard look at trying to simplify the regulations, look at consolidating these hunting districts. And so when I looked at these districts, what I really wanted to try to look for was what was similar about elk and deer, you know, for both whitetail deer and mule deer, to look for those areas that we might be able to combine. So first, just to kind of give you an overview of what this looks like for this area. You've heard a lot about population objectives. So this is for these existing districts, what this looks like. For 200 out here on the west end, our objective is only 300. We have a smaller elk resource in this part of the state. It's more timbered. So it just doesn't have as productive of habitat as other parts of the state, like the Bitterroot. We are within objective in 200, kind of at the lower end of that. 202, very similar, not as productive elk habitat. Overall, we're within objective there. We have a sub-objective in Fish Creek, we're kind of below. So that's something that we certainly have been keeping an eye on. And then 203 over here closer to Missoula, also within objective, but a little different, with most of those elk skewed on the east side of the district. So east of Petty Creek. Petty Creek's kind of right here in this dividing line. And then 201 is this big district here that includes the 9 Mile Valley out to St. Regis. And we've been over objective in that hunting district for a number of years. And ironically, this west side of 283, which has the North Hills elk, where for years we had over objective elk and we're trying to get them down. We have a sub-objective for this population. Technically, we're kind of below, but we have about 200 elk in that district, which isn't that bad of a place to be, but that is an area that we're kind of keeping an eye on as well. Overall, that is still really usually very productive elk habitat in a place that we know that elk can grow really quickly under the right conditions. For deer, so this graph gives you an idea of whitetail deer harvests in these same hunting districts I just showed from 1986 to 2020. This area is really productive for whitetails. You see kind of we had more of a heyday for whitetail harvest back here in the 80s and early 90s. It sort of took a dive down with that infamous bad winter of 1996. And then it stabilized at a lower number. We had a lot of antlerless harvest due to an over-the-counter B tag that was way more successful than we anticipated. We drew that away fairly quickly. The population dropped down a little after that and had kind of come back up and stabilized. So overall, those numbers have been very stable overall in that area over the last 10 years. And if you look at that very last jump up, you might feel optimistic that maybe we're starting a trend to come up. Mule deer buck harvest. So in this area, a lot of this 200, 201, 203 is all on a general license for mule deer bucks. 202 is on limited permits. In all of these areas, what we look at for buck harvest is to see, are we maintaining harvest within 25% of the long-term average, which we are for all of those units, which is good. That just shows we have a stable population. If we start to see a decline in that, usually correlates to a decline in the population. So unlike other parts of the state, this general license seems to be working out pretty well. And the reason for that is because this is all pretty steep and rugged terrain, which is more inaccessible and harder for a lot of people to get to. And so there's just more security for mule deer in this area. So now this is the map showing the new proposed hunting districts. So what we did is we wanted to actually look beyond just our own regional boundaries when we considered this. And so for hunting district 200, right across the CC divide, which is the border between Region 1 and Region 2, and talking to the biologist over in Thompson Falls, who's Mike Ebinger, we decided it might make a lot of sense for elk, especially. Deer is really consistent. I should say that up front. Across this whole area, the deer issue is pretty consistent. So elk was really the main driver and how we made these decisions, these proposals for combining some hunting districts. So 200, what we did is we proposed to expand the existing 200 and grab hunting districts 123 and 124 in Region 1. In 202, we kept that existing district boundary, except right here on the very east end. Currently, that boundary is Fish Creek. And because the elk, there really aren't that many elk between there and Petty Creek, we thought it made a lot of sense to push that boundary from Fish Creek to Petty Creek, and also pick up that part around Highway 200 around Lolo down here. Again, this is just what much more similar elk habitat to the rest of 202 with lower productivity for elk. Also, the Petty Creek boundary is just an easier boundary to enforce because of there's private land in there versus Fish Creek, where people hunt on both sides of the road and can get more confused about which side they're on and what their regulations are. And then 201, this is our district where we really tried to include those areas that were most productive for elk. So we picked up this east side of 203, and that Rebecca already talked about this, but this northern portion of 240, which includes some private land along Lolo Creek. And then we also grabbed this west side of 283, which is those North Hills elk and the rattlesnake as well. So I'm going to go into each one of these hunting districts and talk in more detail. And I'm going to go hunting district by hunting district. But first, I just wanted to point out, the things that stay the same for all of these districts is brow tine bull opportunity. There's no bulls on permits. Whitetail buck opportunity on general license is pretty standard across most of the region anyway. We also retained our youth opportunity for either sex whitetail. But we are proposing one big change for whitetail across this, and that is to have a first week either sex whitetail opportunity on your general license. So for that first week of the general season, you could shoot either a buck or a doe. And so we built that partly too because we were building a district 200 with Region 1 to be consistent with their regs. We're also removing some portions of districts that had some whitetail opportunity. And so thought this was a good trade-off and something that actually this was from a public comment we got in the first round. So we adopted that proposal. Okay, so getting a little bit more into hunting district 200, you can see a little closer here what this looks like. St. Regis being the corner here and Thompson Falls at the top. So for deer and elk regulations, one way that we've been managing it out here is we have a portion, we call it the Mullen Gulch portion. And because this is the area that we've had some private land concerns with elk damage in there, that we wanted to focus some harvest in there. So we have been, that's the only place we've been allowing antlerless elk harvest up to this point on permit. As you know, we're removing antlerless permits. So as part of this simplification process, part of the direction was to look at removing portions. So we're proposing to remove this portion of the district. And the idea is to go to district-wide antlerless elk B licenses. So this is the biggest change in this district because on the Thompson Falls side, they've offered a little bit more opportunity for antlerless elk harvest, where we've been really conservative on the 200 side. And this is just an area where we tend to have pretty low calf-cow ratios. They're just, it's not a real productive area. So, and high predator densities as well. So what we did though is it's thought that if we could combine and go for 50 licenses, that would spread out across the district. And with hunters going to where the elk are, there are more opportunities on the plains and Thompson Falls side that we'd probably get more harvest over there. So I have heard a little bit from hunters that on their side, that represents a little bit of loss of opportunity for them for antlerless harvest. On our Region 2 side, it actually is a more of an opportunity than they had before. But that's something I'm a little concerned about, but something we're going to be keeping a close eye on, making sure that we don't get too many cows harvested on our side. And then also going to district-wide antlerless whitetail bee licenses across this whole area, and starting at 75 with, of course, an ability to adjust that as we go. Mule deer is on general license in this area already, and we're not proposing any changes with that. So next is hunting district 202. So I already mentioned, this is the one where the boundary change pushes that boundary from Fish Creek out to Petty Creek. So what that does, well, first we'll talk about elk again. So this is an area where we also have a portion. This is the only place we were allowing antlerless elk harvest. This is a place we decided we wanted to keep this portion. And this was based on public comment in the first round as well, because the first round we removed it, we took comment, people really wanted it. They didn't want to see antlerless harvest across this whole district because we didn't want to be killing cows in Fish Creek primarily. So we put it back, and with that comment also decided to raise it from what had been 30 antlerless permits, place that with a B license, but bump it up to 50 to try to get a little bit more harvest in there than what we're getting already. And then remove, right now there's currently a whitetail B license in that portion as well. So we would remove that whitetail B license and have just district-wide B licenses, but bump that up from 25 to 50. The reason we want to focus the elk harvest in this area is just, again, we're talking about on a scale, a much smaller scale of elk than what you were just used to seeing in the Bitterroot and Upper Clark Fork. But we want to keep this herd between 50 and 100 basically. And in recent years, even with those tags, we're at the upper end of that and having trouble to kind of keep it within. So there's some block management in that area. There's some good access, but there's increasingly being a little, starting to have a little bit more access challenges around that, but there's still some decent public land opportunity as well. So it could be a little bit of a crowding issue. That's why we don't want to bump it up too much higher too quickly. So the big change for 202 really relates to mule deer, because by pushing that boundary, this is a permit area. It's a trophy area for mule deer. It would expand that mule deer permit area over to Petty Creek. And so that side, which used to be part of 203 for years, has been on a general license. And so that would be a big change to go to permit. So during the first round, we did get quite a bit of comment on that, actually more support for that than against, so we kept it. But one of the comments that we did get was to keep the permit numbers where they were at, even though we're expanding the boundary. People were kind of concerned that they weren't seeing as many trophy bucks in the area. So we decided, sure, let's stay conservative to begin with, and we'll just propose to keep those permits at 150. So the next is hunting district 201. So this is kind of a weird shaped district, the way it kind of goes around the Missoula Valley. And you can see this portion of 260 here in the bottom. Rebecca already talked about 260. So those regulations now, as we mentioned, are consistent between the Missoula portion and the Bitterroot portion. In 201 for deer, we did have a portion district down here. So we proposed to remove the 4 mile portion, and there was only 15 licenses down there. But then have just one district-wide whitetail bee license, but increase that from 100 to 150. And then another thing we considered adding, this is one definitely more, would like to hear what people think about it, because we were trying to kind of find ways to keep some opportunities around the Missoula Valley. But for those bee license holders that draw those 150 tags, we propose a late season archery opportunity with that tag. So if you didn't shoot it during general season, you could, and you were a bow hunter, you could still hunt that tag to January 15th. But I'm not sure how many of those tag holders really would be left, that it's worth extending that or not, because a lot of people are probably going to shoot those deer during the general season. And we did, as we were kind of working through some other archery opportunities, I think we're able to retain some in the Missoula Valley. So one thing that we did was with that 260.01, archery equipment tag. That's good down there. It's good for up to, you can over the counter buy up to 5 licenses. So we propose to make that valid east of Highway 93 in that portion. So that's the old 283 portion, basically, because that's where it's good right now. And we really wanted to keep, there's a lot of people that hunt that, upper Grand Creek and Rattlesnake area. And with the urban deer issues around Missoula, want to maintain that opportunity in there and focus that. So that's still a proposal. And then for elk, so we have 2 elk licenses right now in the current 201. We have an antlerless permit that's good anywhere. And then we have a limited B license that's 150 that's good on private land. So what we're proposing to do, we have to pull that permit. We're going to replace that with a limited antlerless elk B license that's good anywhere. So it would be, we started 150 licenses, but then really in efforts to try to focus more harvest on private land. And there are quite a few landowners that provide access in this area. We want to offer this over the counter unlimited B license 20101 valid on private land only, district wide. This is the one that would also be valid on private lands in 260. And so the reason I wanted those tags to be good on both places is because in that Frenchtown area and that west end, those are some of the same elk that are moving into 260 and out. There's landowners that have property that crosses those boundaries, and it just would be definitely streamlined for people to have one tag and be able to cross that boundary. Obviously, there's the weapons restriction in the river bottom for safety concerns. So there's the early and late shotgun muzzleloader season for elk and otherwise archery opportunity down there. And just to point out, we did have an over-the-counter B license in this area a couple of years ago. We did a region-wide over-the-counter B there for a little bit while. And so we got a chance to test what that would be like in 201. We did get more harvest, so that was really encouraging. We didn't get too much, which was also encouraging. So I felt like this wouldn't be too much pressure to put in here. And obviously, once we can kind of drop this back into objective, we'll look at maybe more of a limited opportunity, but obviously we'll play that by ear and with 260 as well. And just to point out, because the question comes up about population objectives when you start combining districts like this, with 201 being over, I think of this North Hills, even though, technically they're under, that herd is still our biggest herd in Missoula Valley. I think we're going to be revisiting some of these population objectives when we get into the elk plan here, which that process has already started. We're going to be working on that, but I feel confident with the number of elk we have on this east end of 203 and even around the Lolo Creek drainage, that this will be a good tag and might help keep that North Hills herd from exploding again too, which I think is really important. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because that's all my deer and elk and for those 3 hunting districts, and see if anybody has any questions.
We do have someone who has had their hand raised. Michael? Michael, on your end, you should be able to unmute yourself. Yes, we can hear you.
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, was it just up from before? Maybe we never lowered your hand.
It was from before, yeah.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot again.
No problem. Thank you.
Looks like Kit has a question.
Yeah, just on the 201, and I think just a little more explanation sort of on your North Hills justification in terms of, we're aware the counts have been low up there, and it's been a concern of mine just in terms of lumping that in. And we're working with the elk plan that we have now, and I don't have great faith that we're going to complete a new elk plan anytime soon in terms of sort of the impacts on that North Hills herd. It took a big dive. We don't know why. We don't know where the elk went. I guess I would hope that we're being more conservative on that North Hills herd than some of the issues that we're seeing in other parts of that district. But just kind of wanted a little more of your thinking on if there's ways to pull back on harvest. I know you mentioned that in terms of, you know, that, yeah, these are season setting, but they're not necessarily set in stone as far as ways to tweak issues if they occur sort of in more herd specific areas.
Yeah, so I guess one other piece of information I'll just share for what it's worth is that this area typically, most of the elk harvest in the past that we've gotten in the North Hills is late season, where we run late season game damage hunts because that's when the elk show up. This over-the-counter license is only good during the general season. That being said, we all know that any year you get a big snow and elk will migrate and move quicker. So that is a risk there. It's mainly private landowners controlling that access on that north end. So that too is just a factor that keeps, like, you know, big shootouts from happening. And they've always limited it. They allowed access, but been careful about how they allow access in those areas. Again, those are things that can change, you know, ownership changes. So these are all things that I'm definitely thinking about. As far as your question, Kit, about like, well, what could we do to address it? You know, one, and this is a good comment, and you should definitely, you know, put this in your formal comments. I certainly don't want to see those over harvest in that area. Anyway, I'm also concerned about them under the right conditions, having a couple years to, you know, a couple good reproductive years, and they can start to take off again. And we've really seen how they can do that there because it is really good habitat. We could limit that side. It could be a line in the regs that says, you know, this tag isn't valid east of Highway 93. That's one way to address it. And it's one way that I can address it in the future. If we try this for a couple of years and decide, gosh, this isn't working, that's a way that I have to do that. Besides, you know, short of changing the license itself, if there's a reason to change it in other places as well. So I think there's some flexibility there, but I understand your concerns.
Is there, and maybe this is already, I haven't been following this as closely, but as far as like that early rattlesnake hunt, how is that affected with this? The wilderness portion.
Oh, that no longer exists. Yeah, so we got rid of that when the herd did decline. So there's no longer that opportunity. For those that don't know, there used to be an early backcountry season. Back when the herd was way over objective, we were trying to get harvest any way we could. There were some bull permits back there, as well as cow tags, as a way to encourage people to hunt. We didn't get a lot of harvest through that anyway, so decided it was time to pull that. But yeah, it's a dynamic area that changes, and definitely one. The nice thing about it, it's really close to Missoula and a little easier to keep an eye on, and be able to monitor what changes out there if we see more of a decline. Anything else on that area or anything else?
I'm not seeing it. Oh, yes, a hand.
Lindsay?
On my wife's account, but I'm Charlie.
Oh, okay.
But
hi, Charlie.
I got some friends. What's the plan, long-term plan for Fish Creek? Because I know, when I was younger, growing up as a kid, there used to just be a lot more elk in there than there is now. And I've got friends that have been on horseback back in there for years, and they've just been, they're very disappointed with, especially, with I know they've been getting, the wolves have been getting them, and they've been getting some wolves too, but is there going to be a management plan change on, how many elk are actually gonna be in that unit in the, what we're gonna plan on for? I mean, what's the long-term goal for that area?
Well, just so you know, as far as a population objective goes for elk, currently we only have one for the very northern portion of Fish Creek that is official. It's a sub-objective of 202. That being said, I survey all of that area, all of Fish Creek and the Burdette Creek herd and all of it. Our thoughts about why those elk have declined over the years, and that's been a long, steady decline since the 1990s, has been a combination of predation and habitat changes. So on both of those ends, I can speak to habitat and say that the Forest Service, I work closely with the Forest Service, and they're certainly doing work on their end. Really excited about them. They have a plan to do some spring burning in Burdette Creek, which really needs it. We had one forest fire in there, but it didn't really do much to improve the habitat. It didn't really get big enough. But they've done some prescribed fire in other parts of the South Fork of Fish Creek and Stray Creek, and are going to apply it to Burdette Creek. We also have a large-scale weed management project in Fish Creek across land ownership boundaries. So a big partnership between the Forest Service and us and DNRC and private land to we've gotten over $1 million grant money to treat weeds. So that's with the old Plum Creek lands that were in there in our wildlife management area. We're really trying to prove that. So we're trying a lot of different things. And then, what you've seen in predator management, especially recently, has been some changes and opportunities for wolf harvest. A lot of those new opportunities are taking place this year. So it's a little early to say if we'll see more harvest with some of those changes. We have an extended black bear season to June 15th that we've had for a number of years. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, the spring hound hunting season also that is out for public comment right now. We have pretty high quotas for lions in this area as well, and are filling those quotas more often than we're not down there. So there is predator management going on, and there's habitat management going on. And I think the plan, at least on our end, is to continue that. And then as far as if there's any other plan for a particular population objective, that'll have to come out of the elk planning process.
Well, that sounds great. At least it sounds like we got a plan, which is good. I'm just, concerned because I just know some old timers that have been back in there, and I just know that they're really disappointed with how it's went. But like you said, habitat has changed over the years. So, well, hopefully, sounds like we got a good plan there, though. That's good to hear.
Great. Thanks for the question.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions on deer and elk? Okay, I'm going to move on to bighorn sheep. I've got one proposal for the Petty Creek herd, proposing to at least temporarily eliminate the ewe harvest in Petty Creek. In recent years, we've had as many as 7 tags. I've been decreasing that in the last couple of years because of a trend that I'm seeing. I fly it with a helicopter every spring and get a total count and get a lamb to ewe ratio. So I get that measure of recruitment every spring. Overall, our numbers the last couple of years have dropped down below our population objective. So that objective is to be about 130. So within 10% of that. So we've dropped below that, but more concerning to me has been the recruitment has really dropped off. So that's what these triangles are. I know this is a little tough to read, but these triangles represent recruitment. And that's on this side where we want to see that recruitment being up above 30, 40. That's good. Up here is really good, up in 50. When you start to drop down below 30, it gets to be concerning. So you can see recent years, we've had a few years of that. And especially this year, I am very concerned because we've been doing a lot of ground monitoring this year. I've had students helping me out at Alberton High School, and we're only counting 6 lambs this year. So it's pretty abysmal and pretty concerned. Of course, that's from the ground, not from the air. But think it's time to be a little bit more conservative here for sure. And the reason for this, we did see some lion predation on some collared ewes, especially it was a year before last. I lost a bunch of collared ewes, so I was aware that lion predation could be certainly part of it with recruitment. It also seems like we've had some increased road mortality there as well. The paving of Petty Creek Road was always was a concern at the time for sheep. It's hard to know. We try to monitor that and track that. We definitely have had some mortality, but there's certainly some that we don't always hear about as well. So we're keeping a close eye on this. And now I'm going to move on to the Blackfoot, unless anyone has any questions about sheep, and I don't have any moose proposals for that area.
Are you planning on doing any, I know that there was disease testing done in there, what was that, 3 or 4 years ago? Are you planning on doing anything as a follow-up?
Yeah, so I continue to opportunistically, anytime I can get a dead sheep, if it's hit by a car, I try to grab a lung sample off of it and send it to our lab. So it's kind of a continual monitoring. And I have this kind of fun partnership right now with Alberton School, with their students. They were looking for a real hands-on project. So I asked them, I said, well, we've got, this is my concern is we have this low recruitment. And so they're taking students out there a couple times a week and helping monitor. We still have some collars out there helping monitor and classify. That way, if something does die too, we can maybe get on it sooner and get a sample. So we've got a lot more eyes on it right now, which is really helpful.
Hey, Liz, there is a question in the chat that you might want to address. It's from Randy Hodges. I don't know if you can read that.
Oh,
about Fish Creek and the muzzleloader season.
Okay. So Randy's asking about, oops, where'd it go?
Oh, sorry. I might have just dropped it. He was asking about the muzzleloader season and how it might affect the late deer hunting in Fish Creek and whether or not that's a good idea to have. You can pull it on the answered tab. And
okay. Yep. So if it has, so the question is, I'd be curious to hear if there is any consideration to closing the Fish Creek WMA for the December deer and elk muzzleloader hunt. The intent of the formation of the WMA was to protect struggling wintering big game populations. This new season during the vulnerable season seems to be at odds with the goal. Well, it's a good comment, Randy. We haven't actually discussed that. It is one of the few WMAs that doesn't close on December 1st. So it is an exception to that. I think we're still kind of trying to get a handle on, well, obviously this being the first year, where people are going, how much pressure there is. But I appreciate that comment, and that's something we can definitely talk about. So thanks for that. Okay. So moving on to the Blackfoot. And so our biologist, Scott Eggman, put together these proposals. He left the department back in November. We were sad to see him go, but he did a really nice job putting this together ahead of time. So what I'm presenting tonight is based on the work that he did and his knowledge and experience with the deer and elk in the Blackfoot Valley. And this map shows the hunting districts as they stand currently out there. We are proposing some pretty big changes to district boundaries out there. So I'm just going to do an overview of those, and then I'll spend a little time on each one. So this is the change, the proposed new hunting districts. And so the ones that don't change at all are 282, which is the Blackfoot Clearwater Game Range, that area. 292, which is the Garnets here. 280, which is the Scapegoat. And you might have noticed during the first round in the fall, there was a proposal to combine this with one of the Region 1 districts that was also a wilderness district. There was a lot of public comment against that, so that got dropped. So that is why that hunting district currently is the same. And then 290, which is the river bottom portion This is kind of to allow an area with a lot of private land access, different opportunities in there. So the proposed changes are 285. So this hunting district would expand to the west to pick up what was the east half of 283. If you remember, I'm proposing to add the west half of that to 201. So the east half would go to 285 and 283 would go away as a hunting district. And then 281 here would expand south to pick up this area around Ogden Mountain. And it would also grab what was hunting district 284, which was a special archery, the Lincoln Archery District. There would still be a sub-district there that would retain those same opportunities, but it just wouldn't be a standalone hunting district. And then 291 expands to absorb 298, which was this hunting district that's all in the Helmville Valley, bottom a lot of private land there. It would grab that as well as expand east to pick up this portion of what was hunting district 293, but the private lands portion of 293. And then the rest of what was 293, which is a lot of this largely public land around the Continental Divide, is being proposed to be included with 343. The idea there being that a lot of those elk will sometimes move back and forth across that district. So there are some pretty big changes there, and I'll do my best to go through each one of those. Starting with 285. For 285 itself, there's no changes for elk. Although that old portion of 283 that would be added would gain some antlerless opportunity it did not have youth and PTHFE currently. And there would only be 30 B licenses for elk. That's what's in 285 right now. That would just be expanded for the new area. And then for deer, this is one of these areas that's on unlimited permits for mule deer. That would change to a 3-week season. So this represents a little bit of change actually from that unlimited permit area, but also that portion of 283 was on a general license. So that on a 5-week general license. So that changes to 3 weeks for all the reasons that Rebecca described earlier. And then the proposal is to increase the whitetail deer B licenses from 35 to 100 with the expansion of this hunting district. And I'm just gonna, okay, I do have a question, so I'll stop. Charlie, is that you? Remember, it's Charlie, not Lindsay.
About that. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
How do you feel about that change? Because we got a place up in Sealy, and I'm just, I'm a little, how do you feel about that 3-week season and the increase of those B licenses?
For the 3-week season for mule deer and then the increase in the whitetail licenses. Scott Eggman had a much better handle on this than I did as far as having the firsthand information. But again, this is one of these areas that we were just seeing unlimited permits for mule deer just not working the way that we wanted to. So we're seeing, decreased buck harvest. And so we really need to try something different. I think a 3-week season is what we came up with as a first step with that. We don't know if that's going to work for sure, but we are going to be adding some more mule deer surveys, continuing the ones that we're already doing. And, the next step, if that's not working, we're probably going to be having conversations about limited permits in these areas. So I think it's a good move. I think this across the whole region, we're trying to be consistent with this approach and try it out first. And then, I saw Scott increase the whitetail B license opportunity. So I'm confident that he felt comfortable, and he gets, I haven't had a chance to look at his check station data, but he gets some really good data from that as well that he has in terms of making those recommendations. The thing about the B licenses is that we have a range that we work in there so that we can change those numbers every year. So if we get a really hard winter and we see a big die off, we have the opportunity that spring to adjust those licenses before the following fall. So we have a lot of flexibility once we have a license in place to adjust those numbers if we need to. So that's a really comfortable place for us to be as biologists, knowing that we've got that flexibility.
Yeah, I think that, I think that it's a good proposal there. I do, especially for the mule deer bucks. Whitetail does, I think they're still doing, they're not as plentiful as they used to be back in the early 2000s, I don't believe, but or early 90s, late 90s. But I think we still have really good recruitment for deer up there for whitetails. But mule deer lacking big time. But
thanks.
I think that's a good proposal.
Great, thanks for that.
Okay.
Any other questions on 285? Okay, I'm going to move on to 282. This is the Blackfoot Clearwater Game Range that has had some kind of special opportunities there. So I'll run through this and what those changes are. The proposal is to change the antlerless elk B license, the 28200. There's some effort here to kind of build some consistency with start and end dates and licenses. So you're going to see that. But for it to be valid until the end of the deer and elk general season, these licenses were previously valid till about November 10th. And then to change the brow tine bull antlerless 28210 permit to be valid until the end of the deer. So same thing there. For deer, mule deer, whitetail buck opportunities move from a general license, and they were tied to whether you drew other tags, deer and elk tags. So that moves to limited permits instead. And then on that end would be adjusting all the special deer license dates to begin with the first day of the general season. So definitely some standardization of dates there, but trying to retain some opportunity there for people that doesn't tie you if you draw one tag to another opportunity like what we saw before. So kind of separating that out. And Randy, you might have a little more thought on that too, if you want to add anything on some of the thinking behind trying to decrease some pressure with tags.
Yeah, just the piece as talking to Scott, it just really made a lot of sense. We've always been trying to limit the whitetail or mule deer hunting on the game range, mainly because it's a really pretty special opportunity for the elk hunters that draw that antlerless or the brow tine bull or the one youth bull permit opportunity on the game range. But for those of you who have been on the game range when the elk are on there, it doesn't take a lot of pressure to move them and to move them out or off. Therefore, if we have a whole bunch of whitetail hunting on there, and there are a lot of whitetail on there, it could really impact the hunting for those pretty coveted bull permits. So the long-term standard there was try to limit it for deer by tying it to those permit holders. Just for consistency's sake on that, and moving that used to be a B license for a period of time on being able to hunt that whitetail buck and mule deer there. We've shifted that to a permit and dropped the mule deer piece off of that. So it's a whitetail buck permit to hunt on the BC game range. If you draw that permit, it would have the restriction that mule deer buck permits do, where if you draw that mule deer buck or the whitetail buck permit, that would be the only place you can hunt whitetail bucks. So it's a really unique opportunity if you're into whitetail buck hunting, because there are a lot of deer on the game range there, and then it doesn't layer a lot of additional hunters on top of that elk opportunity. So if that helps.
Thanks for that, Randy. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about that because I thought the way the regulation was before was legit, because essentially if you drew a cow license, a cow license, or if you were a youth hunter and you drew the one bull permit that you get in that unit, I'm a little concerned about how that works, because if somebody's hunting a cow elk in that unit, if you draw that limited license, now you're restricted to be able not to be able to hunt a deer. I just kind of thinking if you're out there hunting, it's kind of, I think it's difficult for the hunter to be able to be like, oh, well, can I shoot a mule deer? Can I shoot a whitetail buck? And, you know, all this, I think it'd be easier for a hunter just to say, hey, I've got the cow tag. I'm just like, I'm hunting in the general elk, or, you know, a general district. I can shoot a antlered buck doe or antlered buck mule deer or antlered buck whitetail deer. I think, you know, maybe that might cause a little bit more confusion than what this new proposal is.
Yeah, that's a good addition. I know Scott, when he moved away from tying it to the elk opportunity, there was a lot of support for that. It seemed like there was a modest increase in hunter pressure out there, but it really an increased opportunity for those who wanted an opportunity to hunt deer. And so I might check with Scott again just to see if he was still hearing good support for that opportunity split away from the elk. But very much appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I'm going to move on to 292. So this, we're not seeing any changes. This is one of the districts that's staying the same, the boundary staying the same. No changes for elk, but this is one of the districts where the mule deer buck would change from unlimited permits to a 3-week general season. So not too much on that one. So I'm going to move to 281. And 280, remember, stays the same as well. So I'm not going to discuss that. But 281, that boundary, this is the one that would kind of grab this part of 293, which surrounds that Ogden Mountain area, and also that special archery, the Lincoln Special Archery area. In this case, the antlerless permits, there were only 10 to begin with, were removed when they're not being replaced with B licenses. So we're being a little more conservative on elk here. So that does represent a little bit less antlerless opportunity in that area that we're grabbing out of 293. For deer, mule deer buck changes from unlimited permits to 3-week in this area as well. For whitetail deer B licenses, you'd see an increase from 5 to 50. So a little bit more opportunity there. So any questions on 280 or 281? Okay. So 290, this is a smaller district down in the kind of the river bottom portion of the Blackfoot Valley. Here for changes for elk, elk B license 290.01 would decrease from 300 to 150. Remember, we do have flexibility on some of these numbers, but this is what would be printed in the regs, and an end date change where it used to go late to January 15th, that would be changed to the end of the general season. And then for deer, the archery equipment only, the deer B license 290.20 would replace the 290.51. So there would not be an antlered mule deer buck opportunity anymore on that B license. But there would be that would be the either sex whitetail deer. So as Randy mentioned, and we did this in 260 as well, where we got a lot of public comment early on this issue of keeping a B license in some of these areas where we're trying to kill more whitetail deer, keeping this B license, this either sex opportunity as a as a second tag. And so we've retained it here to just for whitetail. And then that end date, which also changed from what was January 1st to the end of the general season. Yeah, Charlie, you got a question?
Does that apply to, so I mean, that's an archery only district, right? Or not? No,
it's kind of a mixed bag. So it's got some, because of some game damage issues, it's got some rifle opportunities as well. But
yeah, for cow elk only, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, so So they're gonna cut the elk permits in half for rifle. But we're gonna limit the amount of archery pressure in there is what's going on.
So that B license, I'm sorry, I need to, Randy, feel free to jump in here because some of these details, I haven't worked with this as much. I just wanted to answer your question about deer. There is a rifle deer opportunity in there.
On private land, there was.
On private land only. Yep, with a B license. Otherwise, it's archery equipment. And then, sorry, can you ask your question again about the elk?
So they're gonna decrease the elk permit by half. And they're gonna just go to the end of the general season. So there'll be no archery season till January 15th in there for elk anymore. I thought that they did that because there was overpopulation they were way over objective on elk on private land in there. That's why I thought they did that.
Yeah, and I'm tracking you, and I'm looking at our elk master list, which is just kind of our catch for double checking what was proposed, and the proposal for 290 regarding elk on antlerless B license is just to be valid until the end of the deer and elk general season.
Because the thing that I get concerned about that is that really decreases a ton of hunter opportunity. And in somebody, a guy like me who's got raising three kids, if I don't get my elk in the general season, I can go up there with my bow, talk to a private landowner and possibly get on, or hunt some of those federal places that are open up there. And that just kind of concerns me because it's like if they're overpopulation on elk and they're eating all these these landowners feed, and we're decreasing the amount of hunting time up there, why are we decreasing that time? That kind of just concerns me a little bit. And it decreases opportunity as well.
So you can harvest through January 1st with archery equipment. You can harvest a brow tine bull or antlerless elk through January 1st. So that exists on your general license. It's just this B license that the date would change.
Just the B license. Okay, that's what I was kind of wondering about. Okay, so the general license does not change at all, just the B license.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. I mean, it's hard to get on up there either way, so it is what it is.
All right. Okay, so ready to move on to 291. So this district kind of took over 298, and again, took over the private land section of 293. So it's a larger district. The antlerless permit goes away, as we've seen in so many other districts. And that was the tool that allowed some hunting on public and private land in the old 291. So the B license 29103 is going to replace the 29001. So we lose that public-private opportunity. The 29103 replaces it, and the late season goes away, but there is still an early season. So hopefully that makes sense to folks there. But yeah, just letting you know that the B license opportunity for elk is on private lands only. For deer, that first week, either sex whitetail is removed. That was in 291. And there's a removal of B license for antlerless mule deer as well. So this is one we kind of heard about from folks, especially landowners in the Helmville Valley, that 298 area that was kind of built to manage those concentrations of elk there that occur. So we've definitely been listening to that and hearing that concern of removing that district, and are taking a hard look at that. Does anyone else have questions about this expanded 291?
Two 291 is a draw area only for mule deer bucks, correct? all of it. will be proposed?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's 30 for, it's 30 and 30. So there's 30 for youth and 30 for general public.
They're gonna keep that, we're gonna keep the same, that's
Yep.
not gonna change, even with the increased area of 298.
Yep, those numbers are staying the same as proposed.
Okay. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Anything else on 291? Okay, 343. So this is another one of these districts that we've expanded across regional boundaries. So again, we have elk that move back and forth between Region 3 on the 343 side and our portion of 293. So proposal is to join these portions of the district. So some of the changes that you'll see here is in trying to build some consistency between these hunting districts, the youth and PTHFV opportunity changes from what was a brow time bull antlerless to either sex. That's what the 343 side has. And then there would be an elk B license 39600, that would be 300. So that is an increased opportunity on our side as well. But there's a stipulation on this. It's a little different than the stipulations you've seen before on being able to harvest one elk. This just limits you. A holder of this elk B license may only harvest one elk in the district. So you could be out there and you could shoot a bull first. But if you do, that just means you can't then fill your B license there. But you do at least have that opportunity. And then for deer, you're going to see more liberal deer opportunities on the east side of the Continental Divide. Again, where we've kind of offered more deer in other places, you'll see more of a restriction here, removal of either sex whitetail opportunity for archery only season and youth on the west side of the Continental Divide. Some of that was kind of in trying to build some regulation consistency between these districts. So there are some differences between deer here for sure. And we're kind of taking a hard look at whether there's enough here that simplifies, that makes it easier for people to understand, or if it's more complicated. So please weigh in on this. Any questions on 343? Okay, so that's it for Blackfoot, deer, and elk. So I'm just gonna call out for any other general questions on Blackfoot before I move to other species, other statewide species proposals.
Liz, I just have a quick question for you. So just to verify, the 282 bull either sex permit, would that still carry that restriction
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Rebecca had pointed that out earlier. Yep. That in 282, anywhere you draw a bull permit, and that's another one of these places in Region 2 that you're limited to only hunting a bull in that district. So thanks, Rebecca. Okay. Upland game bird. So this is a commission proposal. It started off as being initially a proposal to extend the pheasant season from January 1st to the end of the pheasant season from January 1st to January 31st. During discussions at the commission, they decided to go ahead and expand that for public comment to the upland game bird season that includes mountain grouse, pheasant, partridge, and sharp-tailed grouse, not including sage grouse. So yeah, we'd like to hear from you on whether you like this proposal of extending the upland game bird season. Statewide black bear proposals. So first is a proposal to remove the mandatory, Kit, do you have a question about upland bird?
I do. I'm just curious because I haven't heard anything in terms of biological implications, in particular to native birds where we can't tell sex in the air. If I just haven't heard any sort of what biologically, if there's concerns about it, or if it's more just looking at opportunity, or kind of what that discussion has been, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like from what I understand, especially from hearing from some of the Eastern Montana biologists, that there's not a lot of information or research on this particular question of, differences of harvest from January 1st to January 31st. I mean, some of the original thinking of why that there was that January 1st date was landowner tolerance, just folks and so many of these birds, and we're talking like not our mountain grouse, but pheasant, sharp-tailed grouse, where they're on private land. They do just a landowner tolerance issue. They've had hunters on their land for a long time already. And for mountain grouse, I'm not aware of, any, biological information too here locally to really speak to what would be the, any potential population implications. I mean, some of that just comes to like, well, how many people would hunt that time period in January for grouse? I mean, for example, for our dusky grouse, well, they go up to high elevations and they're sitting in trees. So they're going to be pretty tough to hunt this time of year. Rough grouse, obviously along drainage bottoms would still be vulnerable. And probably, certainly some other birds as well. So it's just hard to say, I guess, how much interest there would be there as well. But I hear you about the biological implications. It's a good question. And it's a good comment to make if you're interested. Anything else on upland bird before I move on? So black bear, the first statewide proposal is to remove the mandatory requirement that each harvested black bear needs to be physically inspected by a department employee. Michael, did you have a question? I just don't want to miss it if it was about upland bird.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, this is about black bear. I'm wondering about the justification for removing the harvested black bear physical inspection. I have some concern about that. I guess that we're at the same time putting more pressure on black bear by using hounds. At the same time, we're possibly reducing the amount of monitoring going on.
Yeah, that's a really good comment to make. We'd certainly welcome you to make that comment. I've been hearing that from other people as well. The idea behind this, I know, started before there was ever even a hound hunting season on the table. Other states have done this, and checking black bear, it gives us really important biological data by being able to take a tooth. So we would still require hunters to submit a premolar, a tooth, within 10 days of harvest. They'd still have to call it in initially, but then learn how to pull a premolar tooth and get that to us within 10 days. So we would still get some information there, but it does, reduce the actual physical checking to make sure sex and things like that we do when we check bears.
It seems, I think most people would be really good about it, but it seems perhaps slightly less likely to happen than bringing the whole bear in, but I could be wrong on that. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The second proposal. Oh, go ahead, Kit.
Can you speak to how hard, I had somebody ask me commenting on this who said, well, that it's pretty challenging to actually do that tooth extraction without an extracting tool and without breaking the tooth. Do you have thoughts on that, just in terms of how easy that is to be done successfully?
It is, I mean, it is a little tricky because it's a small tooth and you really need to get the whole root for it to age correctly. I understand, Bob Inman was working on this when he was still here and looking into how this worked in other states. And I guess my understanding is that they've had some success with at least people being able, I think there's a learning curve there, but learning how to pull teeth. And, and get them in. But, I don't have any personal experience on that.
Yeah, I've seen videos of there's like a bunch of videos on teaching people how to do it with just a knife, and you don't need to have one of those special tooth elevators, which is what we use. So apparently it's not that hard. I always use a tooth elevator, so I can't speak from experience on how easy it is to do with a knife. So.
Okay, anything else on the mandatory check? Some questions? Yeah, well, please get your comments in on that one. And then the second being the hound hunting season. Commission seeking comment on the map and hunting districts where the black bear hound hunting would be prohibited due to overlap with occupied grizzly bear habitat and the potential for incidental take of grizzly bears. So the department worked on building a map, trying to reduce that conflict where this hound hunting season would only take place outside of the area that is shown in blue on this map. So all the areas represented in blue are areas that are considered in or near occupied grizzly bear habitat. Everett, do you have a question?
Yeah, Liz, do you know roughly how many or what the percentage of bear population is in that blue for black bears?
Oh gosh, not off the top of my head, but I can tell you that, you're just overall percentage of our statewide population. So most of it is in Region 1 and our part of Region 2 that is most similar to Region 1, so more forested habitat. So my country in the lower Clark Fork, BMU 200, and the north end of the Blackfoot Valley. That's where we primarily get most of our black bear harvest. Most of it comes out of Region 1. For sure. Does that help answer that?
Yeah, thanks.
And this area, so all of Region 1 is excluded from hound hunting. And I guess just to point out here, because you may not be able to see it on the map, that the 9 Mile Valley, the 9 Mile watershed was also excluded. So you see a little blip right here, because that's an area that we're increasingly starting to see some bears move into. Yeah, Michael, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry for hitting it so often. I have some concern about that for one area, and that is your bear management unit 200, which looks like is going to permit hound hunting, or at least over most of it. Is that correct? That's the way the map.
That's correct. Yep, except for that portion.
My concern with that is looks like it's a linkage zone, as I understand the grizzly bear stuff, between the northern continental population and possible linkage to the Bitterroot, which is the Bitterroot Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, which has been identified as a recovery area. And that is the major linkage area, and it seems to me you're going to have grizzlies coming through there. I know you already are, because we had, I believe it was maybe 2 falls ago, we did have a verified grizzly sighting, as I understand it, in Mill Creek. That was verified, which is just south of Lolo Creek in that area. In addition, or just south of that area. And we had, of course, a famous grizzly bear in Stevensville on the golf course. So anyway, it seems to me that's some concern for me. I think you're kind of pushing the envelope there by having hound hunting in that area. And you're going to end up, my concern would be you'll end up with grizzly entanglements. So,
well, thanks. That's a great comment to submit. So I hope you submitted. And
I did. Yeah, I have submitted it, and I think it's a matter of, well, you guys know much better than I do. It's a matter of time before 200 will turn the other color. So I don't know how soon, as far as grizzlies being there. So
Yeah, it's certainly a map that we're going to need to revisit as time goes on.
yes, yes. Thank you.
Mhm. Were there other hands up? Maybe not. Okay, anything else on black bear? Questions? Oh, Charlie?
Yeah, what's limiting the black bear season to be extended to January 15th in certain districts and areas?
You mean June 15th?
June 15th, sorry.
So our season right now in Region 2 runs to June 15th. In Region 1, it runs to June 1st. That does start to get into black bear breeding season a little bit. It's just a question of, you know, liberalizing harvest or not. We get a little more harvest with that. So for this proposal, I'm not remembering exactly why they landed on that. Maybe Rebecca or Randy do, but guessing they kind of picked the more liberalized timeframe on that. And there is a hound training season that's allowed between June 1st and June 15th as well.
Yeah, I just keep thinking it's very difficult to access certain areas, and you know, in black bear season, you know, with the snow line and stuff earlier in the year. I'm just wondering, you know, if they're going to increase a little bit more opportunity or not. That's all.
Well, definitely the June 15th date is more opportunity for than some areas.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Michael, did you? Actually, oh no, okay. Okay, mountain lion. This is our last proposal. This is a commission proposal for 2 alternatives statewide that are out for public comment. And so what's out for comment is to move all the handling districts to a general license lion harvest. It would be on a quota, then it would close when the quota fills, or to a hybrid season, which is what we currently use in Region 2, mostly anyway, which has an early permit opportunity. Generally, it's here, we run it from December 1st to February 1st. And then whatever quota is unfilled opens to a general season opportunity until that quota fills. So this doesn't represent a change for us in Region 2 because we already are on a hybrid. It is a bigger change for Region 1 because they are on a permit system primarily for most of their districts. So that doesn't mean that you can't comment to change any of our hunting districts to a general season. So this is a good one, or if you want to comment on other parts of the state, but this is an important one to hear your thoughts on as well. So I encourage you to, if you do have opinions on it, to get them in. Any questions on that? And I guess I could say too, there's a lot of things going on with lion management in terms of we have a new statewide mountain lion management plan. Whereas, you know, for years we operated managing lions without having a very good population estimate. We're now in a much better place and bringing some really good science to mountain lion management. We're doing population estimates throughout different ecoregions. So we have a new scale we're managing mountain lions on, based more on similar habitat. So we have a Northwest ecoregion, which is our north part of Region 2 and Region 1, which is most similar. And we started there and are in the process. We've had 2 years now, 1 year in Libby, where they estimated by capture, recapture of lions. We hired houndsmen to go out and do this. Got a population estimate there, and we did it here in the Lower Clark Fork around Superior, St. Regis last winter. And then we now have a lion committee together, formed of members of the public, different stakeholder groups. They're coming together to review that data and make a recommendation to us about kind of where they recommend seeing the population go. We want to see an increase in harvest, decrease, or stable. So we're going to be having conversations down the road in the spring more about quotas and, you know, what those might look like across the Northwest ecoregion. And then we'll move to the other ecoregions as well. And then the idea is we revisit these areas every 6 years, get more real data, and it feeds this population model that lets us know how the population is doing and see if we're meeting our goals for management. So it's exciting that we really are getting some really great data and able to bring some good science to lion management. So any questions there, Michael?
Yeah, I'd like to just shift, if I might. I got muted back to the black bear. May I just for a quick second?
Oh, sure.
And that is, do you have any sense by allowing hound hunting of black bear, how that'll impact the harvest of bears?
For the spot and stock hunter?
Yeah. Well, how much the total harvest would increase, how much more pressure, and how would that affect the spot and stock hunter? Yeah, sure.
No, I don't know. I imagine there might be data on that in other states. I guess I'm not aware of it. I don't know if Rebecca, if you know anything about that, but I think it remains to be seen, again, especially with a new season like this. You don't know where the pressure might go or how much of it. I think there's a lot of questions we're just going to need to be paying attention and trying to answer that. But we monitor the harvest and numbers, and we also have a new population model for black bears that is almost finished. That'll be helping guide those decisions as well. So that's going to help.
That might be coming the other direction from another commentator comment that I heard, and that is, as far as the June 15th date, which increases opportunity, that may have to be decreased back to June 1st if the hound season for black bear increases the harvest substantially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one thing we could consider if we get more harvest. What we look at right now, we really look at female harvest as a percentage of the black bear population. So we want to see that around 30%. When it gets much higher than that, then that's when we have concerns that we're taking too many bears. So yeah, it's something that we're gonna keep an eye on and manage it as we need to and adjust. But that is a way to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, back to lions. Anyone else have anything there? Well, that is all I've got.
Thanks, Liz and Rebecca, and for all that. We might just pause here and see if there's anything from any of the presentation content that we missed. I know we paused a lot through there, so maybe not, but if anybody has another question that's come up. Charlie.
With this new management plan, are they planning on increasing lion harvest in districts 200, 290, 291, all those areas? Are the quotas going to change with this new management plan, do we think, or what's going to happen with that?
So that's going to be at least partially worked out through the help of these committees that we're going to put together in each ecoregion. So I talked a little bit about the Northwest ecoregion. We just started meetings with we just put together a committee there. They're looking at our data. We had the 2 years of collecting data, and they are going to make a recommendation to us about those quotas, and at least in terms of trajectory, not quotas and where they get placed. That's going to be up to you guys to help us comment on where, but as far as what do we want to see the lion population do? Do we want it to increase, decrease, stay the same and then by how much percentage? And then we go from there to quotas and a public comment process and allocation of that, how we want to do that. They also might, their job is also to inform us and give us some recommendations if there's certain hunting districts, if there's conflict or other reasons why they should be higher, or, maybe big game management reasons why they might think that there should be some higher in some places than others. But that'll be the process by which from now on that we're going to use to inform, how many lions we harvest and how those quotas get distributed. And so then that's going to move around, to the rest of the state and then cycle every 6 years back. It'll come back to the Northwest ecoregion. So as we do these studies in each area and get that data to inform that process, hopefully that gives us the better science to make those kinds of decisions.
Okay. Yeah, I just was wondering because I know, we're concerned about mule deer populations, right? And, we're taking back 2 weeks of the season and, we're obviously, the wolves and obviously mountain lions and the predation on mule deer having a big impact, and also hunters are. And, just from what I've gathered from some landowners, in the, upper Clark Fork region is that it seems like they're really getting hammered by the mountain lions, even on livestock. And I don't know if it's really come to fruition that people understand, how many animals are actually getting harvested from hunters, and and I don't even know, for 290 and 291, I believe, don't have all the, it seemed like just talking to them, it seemed like the harvest numbers for mountain lions were very conservative. And that's what I was kind of concerned about, if, how much that's going to change.
Yeah, this new process will give us a chance to have those kinds of fine scale conversations, I think, and hopefully address that concern. Does that help? But it's ahead of us. So we're talking about at least starting with the Northwest ecoregion this spring.
Yeah, it's pretty much like a new management program. That sounds good. I mean, sounds like we're on the up and up of things. That sounds good.
Yeah, but so for now, if the thing now is the structure to comment on. And so if you like the hybrid season, prefer a general license season, or then now's the time. Definitely get your comments in on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? I'm looking. I don't see any more raised hands or anything in the Q&A. Any of our CAC members have questions that we didn't get to? Randy, did you have any closing comments or observations or anything that we might have missed so far this evening?
Just a ton of appreciation for folks following us through the process this year. Really had a lot of attention early and steady through the hunting season, and now with these season setting meetings. And this is the last of our meetings for the season setting and gathering the direct questions from you. Still have time to provide your public comment, but for all of the traveling we did to get into the communities and the in-person meetings, and then tonight, it was really good. It was so many good conversations in communities, and just a ton of attention to the specific proposals, and really good comments throughout that really help us a lot. And as I've described in our other meetings, We've seen from our Fish and Wildlife Commission an interest in reading these comments, and the format when you submit them electronically allows us to cut and paste and connect them to our actual proposals. And our Fish and Wildlife Commissioners are very much reading those. So appreciate you taking the time to submit those electronically so we can track them, and really appreciate the extra attention from our citizen advisors as well, and your participation in tonight.
Thanks, Randy. And so just a reminder to everybody, I know I said this a lot right at the beginning, but the comment period does run for about another week through January 21st, but the sooner the better. Especially there's benefit fresh off tonight's conversation, but it just helps us to get those comments a bit earlier too. So if you're able to do that here in the next few days, that'd be great. The website that we ran through, our homepage directly links you to all those proposals and places where you can comment. So don't forget to do that if you haven't done so already. And with that, again, just thank you. Hopefully providing these online formats is helpful to some of us. I know it's sometimes desirable to be in person, so we've had those opportunities too, but this is certainly a different opportunity and level of convenience too, I think. So thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, and have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.